is called Rumpelstiltskin. Once upon a time, in a cozy little village nestled beside a sparkling river, lived a kind miller and his beautiful daughter. The miller loved to chat and tell tales, and sometimes his stories grew taller than the tallest oak tree in the forest. One sunny afternoon, while speaking with the king himself, the miller, quite by accident, boasted that his daughter was so wonderfully clever she could even spin ordinary straw into shimmering, gleaming gold. The king, whose eyes always twinkled with thoughts of treasure, grew very interested indeed. He had never heard of such a marvelous skill, and a deep, rumbling sound of curiosity, like a far-off bumblebee, filled his chest. The daughter, meanwhile, was just helping her father clean their mill, her hands dusty with flour, completely unaware of the grand, impossible tale being woven about her. The king, known for his grand ideas and even grander demands, immediately commanded that the miller's daughter be brought to his magnificent castle. Her heart fluttered like a trapped bird when the royal carriage, adorned with polished silver and velvet cushions, arrived at their simple cottage. She had never been inside such a grand place, and the very air around the castle walls seemed to hum with an ancient, powerful magic. Her father, looking pale and worried, squeezed her hand, whispering apologies for his careless words. But it was too late. The king, with a stern, unblinking gaze that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, led her to a vast, echoing chamber, its stone walls cold and forbidding, and the scent of old, musty straw heavy in the air, a scent that promised only trouble and fear for the innocent girl. Inside the vast, circular room, a shimmering, golden spinning wheel stood proudly in the center, its polished wood gleaming under the faint light that filtered through a high, narrow window. But it wasn't the spinning wheel that caught her breath. It was the enormous mountain of straw piled high in one corner, reaching almost to the ceiling. It looked like a golden yellow cloud that had fallen from the sky, filling the whole room with its scratchy presence and soft, whispering rustle. The king, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, pointed to the straw and then to the spinning wheel. "You boasted you could spin straw into gold," he declared, his voice echoing from the stone walls. "Now prove it. By morning, this straw must be spun into gold, or your life will be forfeit." The heavy oak door clanged shut behind him, plunging her into a sudden, terrifying silence. Left all alone in the vast, cold chamber, with nothing but the scratchy scent of straw and the daunting task before her, the miller's daughter felt a wave of icy fear wash over her. The silence was so deep, she could hear her own heart thumping like a drum against her ribs. The straw, which had looked so innocent just moments before, now seemed to mock her, its brittle strands a cruel reminder of her impossible predicament. Tears, warm and wet, began to well in her eyes, tracing paths down her flushed cheeks, blurring the faint light from the window. She sank to the floor, feeling the rough texture of the straw beneath her fingers, wishing she could disappear into the shadows. How could she, a simple girl, ever turn such a common thing into something so precious and magical? It was a task beyond all imagining, a trick of fate. As the last sliver of daylight faded, painting the sky in hues of soft lavender and sleepy rose, a tiny flickering light danced into the room. It wasn't a candle, nor was it a star. It was a strange, shimmering glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And in its wake, there appeared, as if from a dream, a tiny, mischievous little man. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen, with a long, pointy hat the color of forest moss, and a coat woven from threads of moonlight and shadow. His eyes sparkled with a knowing mischief, like two tiny embers in the gloom. He didn't walk so much as flit and skip, his movements quick and airy, making not a sound as he approached the weeping girl, a curious smile playing on his lips, a smile that seemed to hold both secrets and a hint of magic. "Good evening, little one," he squeaked, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves in an autumn breeze. "Why the tears? They seem quite out of place in such a grand castle, especially when there's so much lovely straw to admire." The miller's daughter, startled, but also a little intrigued by his whimsical presence, quickly wiped her eyes. "Oh," she sniffled, "I'm locked in here, and I must spin all this straw into gold by morning, or the king will, well, it's too dreadful to say." The little man clapped his tiny hands together, a sound like two pebbles tapping gently. "Aha, so that's the trouble. And what will you give me if I spin it for you?" he asked, his head cocked to one side, his gaze sharp and expectant, clearly looking for a trade, a bargain to be struck. The miller's daughter, desperate and without hope, looked down at herself, searching for anything of value. She had nothing but the simple clothes on her back, and then she remembered her precious necklace, a gift from her grandmother, made of polished river stones and a single smooth amber bead. It was her only treasure, a comfort against her skin. With a sigh, she unclasped it, the cool stones feeling strangely heavy in her palm. "I will give you my necklace," she said, holding it out, the amber bead glowing faintly in the dim light. The little man's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He took the necklace, a curious smile spreading across his face, and then, with a flick of his wrist, he settled himself at the golden spinning wheel. The room filled with the soft, whirring sound of the wheel, a sound that quickly mingled with the strange, rhythmic hum of the little man's magic. Faster and faster he spun, and before her very eyes, the coarse, yellow straw transformed, thread by thread, into sparkling, shimmering gold, catching the faint light with a dazzling brilliance that filled the air with a warm, magical glow. All through the night, the little man spun, and the room became a wonderland of shifting light and golden threads. The air grew thick with the sweet, metallic scent of newly formed gold, and the soft whirring of the wheel was the only sound, a lullaby of magic and transformation. As the first pale light of dawn began to peek through the high window, casting long, sleepy shadows, the last wisp of straw vanished, replaced by a gleaming mountain of pure spun gold. The little man gave a final, satisfied hum, gathered his necklace, and with a wink vanished as quickly and silently as he had arrived, leaving behind only the rich scent of gold and the quiet hum of the wheel, now still. Soon after, the king arrived, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. When he saw the room, ablaze with the dazzling glow of gold, his eyes widened with astonishment, and a great booming laugh of delight filled the chamber. He couldn't believe his eyes. His heart swelled with greedy joy, and he knew he must have more of this magical treasure, much more. The king's delight quickly turned to a deeper, more consuming greed. He praised the miller's daughter, his voice thick with admiration. But then his smile faded, replaced by a calculating glint in his eye. "This is truly remarkable," he declared. "But one room of gold is not enough for a king like me. You must do it again." And so, without even a moment for her to rest her weary eyes, he led her to an even larger chamber, where an even bigger, more daunting mountain of straw awaited her. This pile seemed to scrape the very ceiling, a vast golden yellow sea stretching from wall to wall. The scent of dry straw was almost overwhelming now, filling her with a renewed sense of despair. "Spin this into gold by morning," the king commanded, his voice firm and unyielding, "or you shall surely die." The heavy door clanged shut once more, sealing her in with her impossible task and her growing fear. The poor miller's daughter, her heart sinking deeper than before, found herself once again alone with the impossible task. The second room was even colder, the straw piled higher, and the air seemed to press down on her, stealing her breath. She sat by the spinning wheel, feeling the rough, unyielding straw, and the silent tears began to fall again, warm rivers on her chilled cheeks. The moon, a thin sliver of silver, cast long, eerie shadows across the vast chamber, making the straw seem to writhe and whisper in the darkness. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her completely, a familiar, tiny shimmer of light danced into the room, followed by the appearance of the little man. He skipped in, his pointy hat bobbing, a knowing grin on his face. "We meet again, little spinner," he chirped, his voice like the soft tinkle of tiny bells. "What will you give me this time for my help?" The miller's daughter, remembering her only other precious possession, gently reached up and slipped the silver ring from her finger. It had been her mother's, a simple band adorned with a tiny, smooth pearl, now dull with her own tears. "I have nothing else but this," she whispered, holding out the ring, the cool metal a small comfort in her trembling hand. "Please, if you can help me, take this." The little man's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, and he plucked the ring from her grasp, turning it over in his tiny fingers, admiring the pearl. A fair trade," he chirped, his voice light as a feather. With another flick of his hand, he settled at the spinning wheel, and once again, the soothing hum began. The straw began its magical transformation, strand by golden strand, and the scent of new gold filled the air, mingling with the faint, sweet smell of the pearl. The daughter watched, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest, as the second impossible task, slowly, miraculously, began to melt away under the little man's strange and powerful magic, bringing with it a quiet sense of wonder. All through the second night, the little man spun with tireless energy, his tiny hands a blur, and the whirring of the spinning wheel filled the immense chamber with a rhythmic, comforting sound. The room, once overflowing with scratchy straw, gradually filled with a soft, warm glow as more and more gleaming gold appeared. By the time the first sleepy yawn of morning stretched across the sky, painting the windows with gentle hues of peach and lavender, every last bit of straw had been spun into a sparkling, magnificent mountain of gold. The little man, with a satisfied nod, gave a tiny, almost silent chuckle, tucked the pearl ring into his pocket, and vanished as quickly and mysteriously as he had come, leaving behind only the dazzling proof of his magic. Soon after, the king arrived, his eyes shining with even greater wonder and avarice. When he saw the magnificent treasure, his heart nearly burst with joy. "This is truly astounding," he boomed, a wide, delighted grin splitting his face. "Such a gift! You shall be my queen." The king, now completely convinced of her extraordinary skill, was utterly enchanted. He led her to a third, even grander chamber, where an enormous, towering mountain of straw, higher and wider than the first two combined, nearly touched the arched ceiling. The sheer volume of it was breathtaking, a sea of yellow that seemed to ripple in the faint light. The air here was even colder, and the task seemed even more impossible, pressing down on her with an immense weight. "If you can spin this into gold by tomorrow morning," the king declared, his voice filled with an eagerness that made the very air vibrate, "you shall become my queen and live in luxury forever." He then left her, promising to return at dawn to claim his bride and his fortune. The heavy door clanged shut for the third and final time, leaving her in the cavernous room, the scent of straw thick around her, and the immense, terrifying weight of her future hanging in the balance, a future that seemed both golden and hopelessly bleak. The miller's daughter stared at the daunting mountain of straw, her heart heavy with despair. She had given away her precious necklace and her mother's ring. Now she had nothing left, not a single trinket or token. The cold, hard reality of her situation settled around her like a shroud. She knew she could not spin the straw herself, and she had nothing to offer this strange little man if he appeared again. Just as these bleak thoughts filled her mind, the familiar shimmer of light appeared, and the little man danced into the room, his eyes twinkling with a knowing mischief. "Well, well, well," he chirped, his voice like tiny wind chimes. "Here we are again, little spinner. And what will you give me this time? I see no necklaces, no rings." He looked at her with an expectant, almost hungry gaze, and a shiver ran down her spine, for she sensed his next demand would be far greater than any jewel. The miller's daughter wrung her hands, her voice barely a whisper. "I have nothing left to give," she pleaded, her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Not a single thing." The little man's smile widened, revealing tiny pointed teeth. "Ah, but you will soon be queen, will you not? And queens have many treasures. But there is one treasure far more precious than gold or jewels that you will have one day." He paused, his gaze fixed on her, and his voice dropped to a low, chilling whisper. "Promise me your firstborn child, and I will spin this straw into gold for you." The words hung in the cold air, shocking and terrible. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded with a desperate fear. But the thought of escaping the king's wrath, of becoming queen, and having a future, however uncertain, seemed to compel her. She was trapped between an impossible task and an unthinkable promise, a choice that tore at her very soul. A terrible silence filled the room, broken only by the soft rustle of straw. The miller's daughter felt a profound sadness, a deep ache in her heart at the thought of such a promise. But the king's threat of death weighed heavily upon her, a dark shadow in her mind. She thought of her kind father and the life she might lose. With a trembling voice, barely audible, she whispered, "I promise." The little man's eyes gleamed with triumph. He clapped his tiny hands together with a sound like dry leaves scattering, and settled once more at the spinning wheel. The soothing, whirring sound began, and the magic filled the room, transforming the mountain of straw into glittering gold, thread by shining thread. The air grew warm and sweet with the scent of spun gold, a stark contrast to the cold dread that settled deep in the miller's daughter's heart. This time the magic felt heavier, tinged with a sorrowful future burden, even as the gold piled higher and higher around her, promising a kingdom, but taking a piece of her soul. The third night passed, filled with the hum of the spinning wheel and the silent, unspoken promise. By morning, the vast chamber glowed with more gold than any king had ever dreamed of, a dazzling, blinding spectacle. The little man, with a final, satisfied flick of his tiny hand, gathered his invisible payment, gave a mischievous wink, and vanished into the pale light of dawn. Soon after, the king arrived, his face alight with boundless joy and wonder. He immediately declared the miller's daughter his queen, and the entire kingdom rejoiced. A grand wedding was held, with music and laughter echoing through the castle halls, and the scent of fresh flowers filled every room. The miller's daughter, now queen, wore gowns of silk and velvet and lived in unimaginable luxury. But deep in her heart, a tiny, secret worry always lingered, a small cloud on her sunniest days. Time, as it always does, gently passed, and soon the queen gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby, a precious little prince with eyes as blue as the summer sky and a laugh like tiny silver bells, filling her world with boundless love and joy. One quiet evening, as the moon cast its gentle silver glow through the nursery window and the sweet scent of lavender filled the air, the queen sat beside her baby's cradle, humming a soft lullaby. Her heart was full of a mother's deep, protective love, and for a moment she had completely forgotten the terrible promise she had made so long ago. But then, as silently as a shadow, the little man appeared in the doorway, his pointy hat dark against the moonlight. His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, now held a cold, unwavering gleam. "Aha," he chirped, his voice a low whisper that seemed to chill the very air. "A beautiful baby indeed, and I have come to claim what is mine, Queen. A promise is a promise, as you know." The Queen's blood ran cold. The forgotten dread rose up, suffocating her with its icy grip. Her precious, sleeping child, so innocent and perfect, lay vulnerable in the cradle, and the little man stood ready to take him away, his claim undeniable, his presence a stark reminder of her impossible bargain. The Queen gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. She sprang to her feet, placing herself protectively between the little man and her sleeping baby. "No, oh please no," she cried, her voice filled with anguish, tears streaming down her face. "You cannot take my child. I will give you all the riches in my kingdom, all the gold you spun, 1,000 jewels, anything you desire. Just please leave my baby with me." She knelt before him, pleading with all her might, her voice raw with sorrow and desperate love. But the little man only shook his head, his tiny pointed nose wrinkling with a sly smile. "No, no, no, Queen," he chuckled, a dry rustling sound. "A living thing is worth more to me than all the gold in your castle. A bargain is a bargain, and this bargain, my dear, cannot be broken, not for all the jewels in the world." His words were cold and unyielding, like stones. The Queen wept, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, the soft sound of her sobs filling the quiet nursery. The little man, however, seemed untouched by her sorrow. He stood there, tapping his tiny foot impatiently, his eyes fixed on the sleeping baby. Finally, a flicker of something, perhaps a tiny bit of amusement or a twist of cunning, crossed his face. "Very well," he chirped, his voice still reedy, but now with a hint of something new. "I see you are truly distressed. Perhaps, just perhaps, there is one way. I will give you 3 days, Queen, 3 days to guess my name. If by the end of the 3rd day you can tell me what I am called, then your child will be safe. But if you fail, the baby is mine." With those words, he gave a tiny bow and, with a final, lingering glance at the cradle, vanished as quickly and silently as he had come, leaving the Queen with a fragile spark of hope amidst her overwhelming grief, and a desperate, impossible task to discover a secret name. The Queen, her heart still heavy but now filled with a fierce determination, immediately sprang into action. She knew that time was precious, each moment ticking away like a falling grain of sand. She sent out her most trusted messengers to every corner of the kingdom, to every village, every forest, every mountain path. "Listen to every whisper," she instructed, her voice firm despite her tears. "Listen for every strange name, every unusual sound, every secret tale. Bring back every name you hear, no matter how odd or silly it may seem." All through the first day, the messengers rode far and wide, through sun-dappled glades and bustling market towns, past sleepy farmhouses and ancient whispering ruins. They asked old women by their hearts, young men in the fields, and children playing by the streams. They listened intently, collecting a long, long list of names, some common and familiar, others strange and whimsical, but none, it seemed, belonged to the mysterious little man who had claimed her child. The 2nd day dawned, bringing with it a renewed sense of urgency and a growing knot of anxiety in the Queen's chest. Her messengers returned, their faces weary, but their saddlebags full of names. Barnaby, Humphrey, Frederick, Gareth, Patch, Pip, Wigglefoot, Snicklefritz, a truly endless list of possibilities. The Queen sat on her throne, her beautiful gowns feeling heavy and constricting, as she pored over the scrolls, repeating each name aloud, trying to imagine the little man's face, to see if any of them fit. But none felt right. None had the mysterious, mischievous ring of his true identity. She paced the castle halls, her silk slippers barely making a sound on the cold stone, her mind racing, searching for a clue, a forgotten story, anything that might lead her to the truth. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, and the queen's hope, though still bravely flickering, felt like a candle struggling against a coming storm, the dreadful deadline drawing ever closer. On the morning of the third day, the queen's heart beat with a frantic rhythm, a drum of fear and dwindling hope. She knew this was her last chance. One of her loyal messengers, a kind young man with keen eyes and ears, had ridden further than any other, deep into the ancient, whispering woods, where the trees grew so tall their branches seemed to touch the sky. He had ventured into a place where few people ever went, guided by a strange feeling in his heart. As dusk began to settle, painting the forest in shades of deep green and violet, he saw a tiny, flickering light in a clearing. Peeking through the dense foliage, he saw the strange little man dancing wildly around a small, crackling fire. He was leaping and twirling, his pointy hat bobbing, his tiny figure silhouetted against the flames. And as he danced, he sang a peculiar, joyful song, his reedy voice echoing softly through the quiet woods, a song that held the secret the queen desperately needed. The messenger held his breath, hidden behind a thick oak tree, listening with all his might. The little man danced faster and faster, his tiny feet kicking up leaves, and his strange, reedy voice grew louder, filled with a triumphant glee. He sang, "Tonight I brew, tomorrow I bake, the queen's own child I soon shall take. For little knows my royal dame that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." The messenger's eyes widened. He listened again, making sure he had heard correctly, letting the strange, whimsical name sink into his memory. Rumpelstiltskin! What a peculiar, wonderful name! He knew with a certainty that shone brighter than the little man's fire that this was the secret the queen needed. Without making a sound, he slipped away from the clearing, his heart pounding with excitement and relief, and began the long, urgent journey back to the castle, spurred on by the knowledge that he carried the power to save the little prince. The messenger rode through the night, the strange name Rumpelstiltskin repeating like a magical chime in his head, until he reached the castle gates just as the first rays of sunlight touched the tallest towers. He found the queen distraught, her face pale with worry, pacing her chamber. "Your Majesty," he gasped, out of breath but brimming with excitement. "I have found it! I have found the name!" The queen, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate hope, listened intently as the messenger recounted his journey and the strange song he had overheard in the woods. She felt a surge of strength, a glimmer of light breaking through her despair. She thanked the messenger profusely, her heart filled with a mixture of immense relief and a growing sense of courage, knowing now that she held the key to her baby's safety, a secret whispered from the very heart of the forest. Later that morning, the little man appeared in the queen's chambers, his eyes gleaming with a triumphant, expectant look. "Well, queen," he chirped, his voice smug, "do you have my name? Or shall I take what is mine?" The queen, though her heart still hammered like a bird's wings against her ribs, straightened her shoulders and looked at him with a brave, steady gaze. "Perhaps you are called Casper?" she said, testing him, her voice calm. The little man snorted. "No, that's not it." "Or perhaps Melchior?" she tried again, watching his face. He shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips, enjoying her struggle. Then, with a deep breath, the queen looked him directly in his sparkling eyes, and her voice clear and strong declared, "Is your name Rumpelstiltskin?" The little man's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of furious shock. His eyes widened, his face turned a fiery shade of red, and he let out a shriek of pure, enraged fury, a sound like tearing silk. The little man shrieked and stamped his tiny foot on the floor with such incredible force that the very ground beneath him groaned. He was utterly consumed by a wild, furious rage that seemed to shake the entire room. He stamped his foot again, so hard this time, with such an astonishing burst of anger and magic, that the sturdy wooden floorboards cracked and splintered beneath him. With a sound like thunder, his tiny leg plunged right through the floor, creating a gaping, dark hole. He tried to pull himself free, struggling and flailing with all his might, but the hole seemed to hold him fast like a trap. The queen watched, her heart pounding, as the furious little man cried out one last, desperate, angry bellow, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and utter defeat. He pulled and pulled, but it was no use, for his own furious magic had turned against him, pulling him deeper into the earth. With a final, frustrated groan and a mighty, desperate tug, the little man, still kicking and squirming, vanished completely into the dark hole he had made. The floorboards settled with a soft creak, leaving only a lingering scent of burnt wood and a faint shimmer of magic in the air, but no trace of the strange, mischievous creature. He was gone, disappeared forever, as if he had never been there at all. A deep, profound silence filled the room, a silence of peace and absolute relief. The queen, her knees weak with the sudden release of tension, sank onto a nearby chair, taking a long, shaky breath. Her baby was safe. The terrible bargain was broken, the danger gone, and her heart, once so heavy with fear, now felt light as a feather, filled with an overwhelming sense of joy and gratitude, a quiet happiness that hummed through the castle. The kingdom was safe, the queen and her precious baby were safe, and the air in the castle seemed to hum with a newfound peace, a gentle, quiet magic. The moon, a bright, watchful pearl in the velvet sky, cast a soft, silvery glow through the tall windows, painting the nursery in peaceful shadows. The little prince, nestled warmly in his crib, slept soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling with soft, even breaths, completely unaware of the great adventure his mother had bravely faced to keep him safe. The queen, now free from her secret burden, looked out at the twinkling stars, each one a tiny candle in the vast, dark blanket of night, and felt a deep, calming sense of contentment settle over her heart. All was quiet, all was well, and the long, exciting day had finally come to its gentle, sleepy end, ready for dreams of kindness and courage. And now, as the stars twinkle softly outside your window, and the moon shines its gentle light down on your sleepy world, it's time for you to drift off to your own sweet dreams. Close your eyes, my dear one, and let your imagination carry you to wonderful places, just like the queen in our story, who found her courage and protected her precious baby. Feel the soft blankets tucked around you, hear the quiet whispers of the night, and let your breath slow and deepen. Remember how powerful a name can be, and how bravery can shine even in the darkest moments. You are safe, you are loved, and just like the happy ending of our tale, all is peaceful and calm. Sweet dreams, my little one. Good night. And that is the end of our story. Thank you for listening to GoReadling Bedtime Stories. Visit GoReadling.com for more stories, reading adventures, and fun learning for kids. Sweet dreams, little one. Good night.